let's go to our review.
Let's do it because we're running out of time here. Oceans is the game we're reviewing. It is a 2020 release. The designers were Nick Bentley, Dominic Crapuchettes, Ben Goldman, and Brian O'Neill. The artists are Guillaume Ducot and Catherine Hamilton, and it is published by North Star Games. Trey, you have played this several more times than I have. Will you lay out for people what Oceans is?
Okay, so Oceans is kind of the new and improved game of Evolution, which I never actually played. But the idea in this game is that we are forming different species of fish and evolving them over time. On your turn, you are going to assign, play a card. Every round you play a card. You assign a trait to a certain species. Over the time, you're going to end up forming multiple species. These species can have multiple traits so that, you're creating what starts as a very simple species of fish. This is a predator. This is a filter feeder. This is a scavenger. You can add additional traits to them like tentacles or transparent that end up changing how these fish evolve. And part of the really interesting things about this game is that you end up creating an ecosystem that exists both for your own species and how they interact with each other, but how they interact with other players' species of fish. So as we play the game, on my turn, I'm going to draw a card. I'm going to add a trait to a fish. I'm going to be able to have one species feed. We're basically like adding fish from a common pool to our species, and so they grow. Every round they're going to do something which is called aging. What that really is you're taking fish off your player board and you're putting it into your score pile that is separate from the kind of like environment where things can still be stolen and preyed upon by other players. And then the final thing you do is you draw cards. You have a hand of cards in this game, and you're always drawing up to 6, so that on your next turn you're going to play one card, and then your turn passes.
And the game is over when the ocean is empty of fish.
That's right. So what's going to start as a very simple game is going to become increasingly complex on every turn. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about this game, and I think it's a really smart design decision, is that there's essentially a first half of the game and a second half of the game. In the first half of the game, we are only playing cards from what's called the surface deck.
And there are only 12 different types, right?
There are only 12 different types of cards within the surface deck. This is common knowledge. Everybody knows what they are. And so the species that we're forming at the beginning of the game are it's somewhat finite in terms of the combinations that we can put together. That said, with 12 different cards and how you combine them, different players have a lot of different ideas of kind of like engines that you build between your different species of fish in order to kind of generate the most points.
And so far, we've identified probably 3 main major strategies using those 12 cards. So far, right?
So far. There are more. The designer, Dominic Crapuchettes has been on BGG outlining, I think he's identified at least 7. Just because I think there was a feeling that there may be, only 2 or 3 kind of valid ones. He's tried to identify at least 7. Part of the fun of the game is trying to figure these out for yourself. But these are kind of like basic strategies that with a few plays you kind of see the wisdom of how you can kind of combine these basic cards.
But yeah, I mean, let's just say that Dominic might be right, but he might be wrong. I mean, in Tapestry, we had people saying there are only some of these civilizations that are playable, and some of them seem way overpowered, and the designers came on and said, no, they're all playable. You just have to play it more.
Well, listen, here's why I don't think your comparison is correct. Mm-hmm. Yes, when you draw your hand, you draw a hand of 6 cards at the beginning of the game. This is your starting hand. That is going to determine somewhat the direction you go on your first few turns. But in this game, it's possible to, for example, dump your entire hand and draw 6 new cards. So you're not locked into anything the way when you play Tapestry, you're playing a certain what do you call it in Tapestry? You've got a it's not a nation or something,
whatever.
but you're playing a certain thing that's going to have an asymmetrical power that you're locked into. There's nothing like that in Oceans. You just have your hand of cards.
Okay.
And
I'll use a different example. The Splatter said that they felt very strongly in the original Food Chain Magnate that playing starting with a marketer was going to be a completely viable strategy. And people told them that we don't really think that is. We think that there are really only two good starts. Part of the reason that the expansion came out was they wanted the valid decision space or the successful decision space to be wider than that. So maybe there are 7 different ways to do this.
Here's the thing. Here the answer is we don't know, and I think like the way you're thinking about it is actually kind of wrong for the kind of game this is. Okay. Let's get to that in a moment, because it's really going to come down to what kind of game is this? Is this supposed to be a highly serious competitive game, or is this more a beer and pretzels, crazy, where this is a game where we have species of fish. I'm eating your fish, you're eating my fish. We're preying off each other. It has some trashy elements to it. Absolutely. I think that's actually part of what makes it a lot of fun. Mm. Let me get to, though, that's the first half of the game.
Okay.
The second half of the game is once you've kind of you've pulled like half the fish out of the ocean. It's not even half, but there's a point where the game shifts because you trigger something called the Cambrian explosion. Once the Cambrian explosion has been triggered at the midpoint, you start to be able to play these deep cards. So we had a deck of surface cards that only had 12 different types of cards. The deep cards, I think, are like 75 unique cards that are all completely different. So this is where the species really start to get customized and crazy, and some of these cards are incredibly powerful, but they're expensive to play. And so any of the kind of hey, here's my base strategy that I'm doing from the first part of the game, they potentially can just be completely thrown out of whack by the deep cards that people are starting to play in the second half of the game. It's also the case that once this Cambrian explosion happens, your fish species start aging twice as fast, which means it's harder for them to survive in the current environment. You start to be you play 2 cards a turn instead of 1. So the game has this natural progression of simplicity and then ramps up into this highly involved ecosystem between the different players that ramps up into highly specialized creatures, feasting off of each other, competing, creating self-sustained ecosystems versus preying off of other people's boards that ends up becoming very interesting, I think. It's also the case that every single game you play here has a couple of scenario cards that you flip over, which will be unique conditions that will be triggered later on the game that will apply certain rules to make the game unique that you have to consider when building the game. Like, we know this is going to be an incredibly inhospitable environment in the second half of the game where every single species is going to age twice as fast. And so, we need to design our fish to be especially robust.
Yes.
So I have really enjoyed this game because I find it to be highly interactive, and I've enjoyed playing it even when I don't win. I think there have been plenty of times where I've played this game, and in the same way that I can kind of, when playing a good game of Agricola, and I can take a certain amount of pleasure in just look at the crazy farm I created during this game, regardless of what my score was. I think there's plenty of times where I look down at the end, near the end of the game in Evolution, and I've got, all these completely random different types of fish that do crazy overpowered things, and I'm kind of enjoying those combinations whether or not I scored a lot of points or not.
Right. But when you say interaction, what do you mean? To wit, I mean, how much the game seems to be, when you first look at it, it seems to be a thing where I have a predator, and a predator can go and steal fish from your species, or I have a feeder, that's going to just soak up the fish from the common pool. I have a shark tender who, when somebody has a predator that activates, I get a little something as well. And it seems like a lot of these things seem like, okay, I'm going to be getting something from the person on my left or the person on my right, or maybe even the person across from me. But in point of fact, the way the game plays, the emergent play from the game, mostly creates, to some larger or smaller extent, self-contained ecosystems where I am getting the almost all of the benefits from each player can only have one creature that attacks and feeds, or what's the other word?
That's a rule. Only a single species feeds every turn.
Correct.
But all of them are going to age. And
a lot of the other cards in those initial 12 are ways to leech off of those feeders that are attacking or feeding. But in reality, what you're doing is you're quickly building up a thing where you're flanking your shark with 2 different shark parasites that are getting the stuff from the shark. So
right. You're building a self-sustaining engine.
Correct. And by doing that, what seems to end up happening, at least in my limited experience of the game, is that it's there isn't a lot of interaction in even if I'm being attacked by somebody else's shark, except for the last round of the game. That doesn't seem to do a lot, because most of the time when it's my turn, I'm generating the fish I need to keep my species alive for the most part, and
right,
and to move on.
This is where the deep deck comes in, because the deep deck has all of these different kind of unique, crazily overpowered, weird cards. There are solutions for breaking other people's engines in those cards. I would say that's what the designers would say. It's like, as these deep cards come out, you're both finding ways to superpower your own engine and to pivot to a new engine because of certain cards in your hand. You also have ways to kind of mess up other people's plans with these cards. Now, Tom's criticism here is one that many people on BGG have floated, and this is an active debate in terms of, like, is the strategic space here not actually that interesting? I feel like it is interesting, but I also don't regard this as a game that I'm not like deeply concerned that this be an incredibly balanced competitive game. I do think this is like a nice, light to medium game that is a beer and pretzels game in which I'm going to have a bunch of crazy fish species, and I'm going to, end up making it a kraken and attacking your guy. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not. I think your expectations for this are kind of not matching what the game itself is. I also feel like, like we've all been in the situation where we've played a game once, and we've said, "Oh well, kelp strategy. Kelp strategy is the way to play." Underwater cities. Oh, cowboy strategy. We got to do cowboy strategy when you're playing, or Great Western Trail. Now, a lot of times that ends up being true, but we also know that, like your strategic understanding of a game after 1 or 2 plays may not be.
Oh, of course not.
May not be fully realized.
I'm gonna go one
I have
step.
found that journey in this game to be really interesting and delightful, and I'm often like finding each game to be completely unique. Now, the games I've played with Paul have not worked out that well, and he's kind of said I should love this game, and he doesn't.
Yes.
I think part of the nature of all these different random deep cards coming out is that the game can kind of miss sometimes where interesting combinations don't happen.
Yeah.
But I've had plenty of games where they do, and things can be very swingy and very dramatic. There could be, like you said, interaction in that there can be a ton of table talk in this game where you're like, why are you attacking me? You need to be attacking Tom. Tom's winning. Tom's got the filter feeders flanked by 2 whale cleaners. Like, we have to break up that engine. Like there's like, if you enjoy that kind of table talk and the social massaging that goes into games, then this will be an excellent game for you. If you find that type of finagling and whining and manipulation onerous, this is not the game for you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I have a few caveats that I have to put out there. Caveat number one is that I have never played this game in front of human beings. I have only played this on Tabletop Simulator, and as I said earlier in this episode, it makes games that are a 10 for me feel like an 8. So I don't think that you should hear my lack of tremendous enthusiasm for this game. I think you need to put a huge asterisk next to it, because I don't think that I'm getting the best that this game can give me. I don't think it is. And my love and enjoyment of games is right now at a little bit of a lull, because I'm just not whatever it is about the face-to-face board gaming experience that I'm not getting from that is kind of poisoning the well a little bit. And I have to say that. The second thing is, you're absolutely right that I'm seeing things in the, I've only played this 3 times. But I'm seeing things in those 3 times that feel to me like, oh, I wish that this wasn't like this. And once the deep cards come in, then you're absolutely right. Then all bets are off, and all sorts of different things can happen. But I don't know. I don't know if my perception of these things is an accurate one or an inaccurate one. I don't think we have enough plays about it. But I do, for me personally, I'm kind of, to some extent, now that I understand the game, I'm waiting for the deep part to kick in. And until the deep part kicks in...
Yeah, I'm not sure. This game may be a little light for you. It may not be, like, I think you want more complexity. I think you want more deepness, and that may not be there.
I feel like there are several different things you can set up. Generally, until the deep cards come in, you're trying to set up at least 3 species in front of you that are working symbiotically and are working together. Maybe a 4th if you can manage it, and you're trying to set yourself up for great. And you're trying to get a look at some deep cards and get ones that are going to surprise people in terms of how they're going to change the thing. But that's a surprisingly long amount of time that you're doing that, right? And so it feels like a lot of time spent on
you can play this game in an hour, don't you think?
We haven't. But once again,
that's really kind of Tabletop Simulator.
I don't know. That's what I don't know. I don't know.
I think that's tabletop, because moving all these little fish is a little bit tricky. Here's my recommendation to people at home.
Sure.
I think this is how you should think about this game. I think this game kind of occupies a similar space as Wingspan in terms of like games that are like a game that you would hand to some people that say, I've played Catan, I'm ready for something next. Like, I think this would be a fine game to hand to somebody who's fairly new to the hobby and ready to play something
great.
Else.
Yeah. I totally get that. I think that the art is gorgeous on it. I think that the card art and
it's a good looking
game. It is a good looking game. It has a great table presence. The little fish tokens that you're getting and the various colors of that is phenomenal. It can eventually play to 6 players, which is a huge draw. I think that
I wouldn't, though.
Maybe not.
It'd get too slow. Slow.
Well, that's part of my criticism of it. And in the light to medium game space, I don't mind this game. I really don't. I don't hate this game. I don't. I just
to me it feels like it's
it.
about, like, given with the pandemic and everything.
Yeah.
This is about the level of heaviness of game that I'm mentally prepared to play with.
Oh, that's
right
interesting.
Now.
That's interesting. I think I get that. Yeah. No,
I'm not sure I'm down for roads and boats during the pandemic,
See, I'm
but
craving...
that's me. I'm just saying, for myself, Oceans is about as heavy as I want to get.
And for me, I think because I know that the experience that I'm having in these games is not what I want them to be. I want to play the heavier stuff that I have a really hard time getting to the table, because then at least then I'm getting my thing. So we have kind of almost opposite agendas a little bit in this.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't want people to think that I am poo-pooing this game. I don't want people to think that I'm saying Oceans is a bad game. I don't think it's a bad game. I don't think it's a bad game at all. One of my favorite, like early, old games was a game called Soup. I think Primordial Soup was the English language when they finally. I have the German version, but the Primordial Soup was the game, and in that game you each start with a couple single-celled amoebas floating in a primordial soup, and you're adding adaptations to them. And as you add these adaptations to them, they're becoming, all of a sudden, mine can eat yours, or mine can run away from yours, or right. It very much felt like Oceans, and I loved that game. The thing that I liked about that game the most, though, was that there would be things that would happen in the game that would change the game state kind of dramatically, more so than in this game there are only two little cards that when all of the fish are gone from this part of the ocean, then this card takes effect, and the second time that second thing takes effect. In Primordial Soup there was much more of the environment fighting back a little bit, which I don't know, for me was great. I don't think Primordial Soup is a great game. Is a great game. I don't think it is, but there was something about
said
it.
Either.
I didn't say, but I stopped myself. I stopped myself before I said either. But there's something that I really love about that, and the same thing that I love about that, I love about this. I love about the idea that I am creating these species and I'm giving them adaptations that are going to give them something that your species does not have, and because of that, everybody has to be watching what other people are doing. Even though, like I just said, I don't think that the level of interactivity is as high as it should be. I do think you have to pay attention. And the moment the deep phase enters, you have to pay very close attention to every single deep card that a person plays, because that's when you find out what has this person's played a game that seems very vanilla, and now all of a sudden here comes their big guns. What are they doing?
Right.
What's the real way that they're going to kill me?
Unlike a lot of games that I feel like we've played recently, and maybe this is, again, as part of Tabletop Simulator because it's so easy to look at people's tableaus, is I feel like I have a really good idea of what's going on with every player.
Yep.
Having played the game 5 or 6 times now, whereas we've played a bunch of other games where, like, I don't know what's, like, when I'm playing Maracaibo, I don't know what's going on with your board over there, Tom.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see that you've put a lot of investment into, helping the British, but I don't know your engine. Whereas in Evolution, I feel like I can understand what a player's doing pretty easily, and part of that's just the 12 surface cards, and so it's very digestible understanding what's going on with everybody else. And I think when it comes to the scenario cards, and maybe this was kind of what I was getting at in terms of strategy and the points in which we start to form strategy, like a lot of that is in the scenario cards that you need to be working towards something. But I also just think this game has a beautiful evolution of complexity as you play it. It starts so simply.
It does ramp.
And then continues to ramp up in complexity as you play it in a way that I think is it kind of gives you a more complex game as you're ready for it. That made it for a very good experience for me playing it the first few times.
I think that's 100% valid. I totally agree with that. That is Oceans. Listen, you play it on Tabletop Simulator. Try it out. It does not take that long, and it's pretty easy to grok. It's pretty easy to understand and play. Maybe you're gonna love it. Maybe you're gonna love it like Trey did. I hope that you do. I hope that you do.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.